Let's start with a wild fact. Sometimes a single absurd event can change the world forever. Picture this: angry noblemen, a castle window, and officials suddenly airborne. It sounds like slapstick, but this act, defenestration, sparked a war that would last 30 years and kill millions. This is the story of how a fall from a Prague window set Europe ablaze. But this drama didn't come out of nowhere. Think of history as a pile of gunpowder. Here, a century of religious tension. Since Martin Luther's 95 Theses in 1517, Europe was split, Catholic versus Protestant, a clash over power and identity. The Holy Roman Empire, a patchwork of states, was the epicenter. Some rulers were Catholic, others Protestant, creating a fragile balance. Prague, capital of Bohemia, was a hotspot. Bohemians valued their religious freedoms, but their new king, Ferdinand II, was a devout Catholic. Ferdinand began rolling back Protestant rights, shutting churches and breaking old agreements. The Protestant nobles felt cornered and betrayed. When people feel that way, they act. In this case, a castle, a window, and a very long fall. That single act would ignite a war that would reshape Europe. The powder keg was ready. All it needed was a spark. And in Prague in 1618, the spark was lit. The world would never be the same. May 23, 1618. Furious Protestant nobles stormed Prague Castle to confront the king's regents, Vilém Slavata and Jaroslav Borita Z. Martinic. The argument explodes. The nobles seize the regents and their secretary, Philip Fabricius, and hurl them out a third-story window, about 70 feet down. Miraculously, all three survive, landing in a heap of manure. Catholics call it a miracle. Protestants call it luck and bad castle plumbing. But the act itself was the point. A bold public rejection of imperial authority. News spread like wildfire. Protestants saw defiance. Catholics saw heresy. The Bohemians set up their own government and elected Frederick V, a Protestant, as king, a direct challenge to Emperor Ferdinand II. Ferdinand, now Holy Roman Emperor, rallied Catholic allies and raised an army to crush the revolt. Protestant states watched nervously, knowing they could be next. What began as a local dispute was now a European crisis. The defenestration was the match. The continent was the powder keg. Armies began to mobilize. The 30 Years' War had begun. The fate of Europe hung in the balance. The dung heap became legend, but the real story was the fire it started. The war would soon engulf nations far beyond Bohemia, and there was no turning back. This defenestration wasn't random. It was a deliberate echo of Bohemia's rebellious past. In 1419, reformers had thrown Catholic officials from Prague's windows, sparking the Hussite Wars. By targeting Ferdinand's hardline Catholic regents, the nobles sent a message: your power stops here. The act was a declaration of open rebellion, not just against two men, but against imperial re-Catholicization. Prague erupted. Rebels seized control, formed a Protestant government, and raised an army. They deposed Ferdinand and crowned Frederick V, hoping to draw in powerful Protestant allies. This wasn't just a coup, it was an international provocation. The Holy Roman Emperor had to respond or risk losing all authority. The window toss set off a chain reaction leading straight to war. Europe was now on a collision course. The Bohemian Revolt could have been a local affair, but Europe's powers had too much at stake. For some, it was a holy war. For others, a chance for land, riches, or glory. The Catholic Habsburgs, ruling Austria and Spain, saw a threat to their dominance and rallied Catholic allies like Bavaria. The Protestant side was less unified. Frederick V hoped for help from England and the Dutch, but support was slow and weak. The Bohemian Revolt ended in disaster for the Protestants at White Mountain in 1620. But the emperor's brutal crackdown, executions, land seizures, forced conversions, shocked Protestant Europe. Other Protestant powers realized they had to act or be next. Denmark's King Christian IV intervened in 1625, seeking to defend Protestants and expand his own power. The war was no longer just about Bohemia. It was a European struggle for the continent's future. Alliances shifted, armies grew, and the conflict spread. The 30 Years' War was now everyone's war, and it was only getting started. Just as the Habsburgs seemed unstoppable, Sweden's king, Gustavus Adolphus, entered the war in 1630. A military genius and devout Lutheran, he brought new tactics and energy, turning the tide for the Protestants. His army's mobile artillery and aggressive strategies stunned imperial forces, winning a string of victories. For a moment, it looked like the Habsburgs might fall, until Gustavus was killed at Lutzen in 1632. With Sweden's momentum stalled, France, ironically Catholic, joined the Protestant side. Why? Politics. Cardinal Richelieu, France's real power, feared Habsburg dominance more than Protestantism. France began funding Sweden, then declared war on the Habsburgs in 1635. The conflict shifted, no longer just Catholic versus Protestant, but a struggle for European dominance. France and the Habsburgs, both Catholic, now fought for power, not faith. The war's motivations were tangled: religion, politics, ambition. The fighting intensified and the devastation spread. The 30 Years' War had become a battle for the future of Europe, and no one was safe. As the war dragged on, its original causes faded. What remained was endless violence and devastation. Armies lived off the land, plundering and burning as they went. Civilians suffered most. Starvation, disease, and violence became daily realities. The population of the Holy Roman Empire dropped by up to 40%. Some regions lost over half their people. Most deaths weren't from battle, but from famine and plague spread by the armies. Fields went unplanted, trade collapsed, and entire communities vanished. The trauma left deep scars on German memory, stories of horror passed down for generations. The sack of Magdeburg in 1631, where imperial troops slaughtered 20,000, was just one infamous atrocity. The war's brutality was unmatched, creating a world of fear and uncertainty. The 30 Years' War became a symbol of how religious and political fervor can spiral into catastrophe. The cost was almost unimaginable: 8 million dead, a continent scarred. The war changed not just borders, but the very fabric of society. Europe would never be the same, and the world was watching. By the 1640s, Europe was exhausted. The war's original religious passions were long gone, replaced by a desperate need for peace. No side could win outright. The Habsburgs couldn't crush Protestantism. Their enemies couldn't destroy the Habsburgs. The war had become a political struggle for territory and power, with Germany as the battleground. Peace talks began in Westphalia in 1644, involving hundreds of diplomats from across Europe. Negotiations were slow and complex, split between Catholic Munster and Protestant Osnabrück. For the first time, a major war would end not by a victor's decree, but by international agreement. The diplomats weren't just ending a war. They were trying to build a new order for Europe. The Peace of Westphalia would change everything. The age of religious war was ending. A new Europe was about to be born. The Peace of Westphalia, signed in 1648, redrew Europe's map and changed its politics forever. The Dutch Republic and Switzerland gained independence. France and Sweden expanded their territories. The Holy Roman Empire's hundreds of states gained new autonomy, able to set their own policies and religions. The treaty enshrined the principle of state sovereignty. Rulers could govern without outside interference. This was a radical break from the old idea of a universal Christian empire. The modern system of independent nation-states was born. Religion faded as the main driver of international politics. State interests now came first. Wars would be fought for power, not faith. The age of religious warfare was over. Balance of power politics had begun. Europe had entered a new era, and the world would follow. It's astonishing that a window toss in Prague could trigger such vast consequences. The 30 Years' War was a tragedy, but it forced Europe to rethink power, religion, and the state. The Peace of Westphalia established sovereignty and the modern state system. Governments grew stronger, more centralized, and more capable, sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. The war's devastation accelerated the rise of powerful monarchies and new ways of governing. History is full of moments where a single act changes everything. From that window in 1618 to Westphalia in 1648, Europe was transformed, and so was the world. The legacy of the 30 Years' War still shapes us today.